when we think about ancient China's imperial examination system, known as the Keju. The story we are usually told is one of pure meritocracy. We picture noble scholars sitting in silent courtyard cells, burning the midnight oil, reciting classical poetry, and rising from humble farming villages to become powerful government officials, based purely on their intellect. It is often celebrated as one of the greatest administrative inventions in human history, replacing inherited bloodlines with standardized testing over 1,000 years before Western nations adopted similar civil service exams. But if you step back and look at the actual mechanics of this system, a very different picture emerges. The imperial exam was not just a test of knowledge. It was the arena for one of the most sophisticated, desperate, and absurdly creative arms races in human history. It was a centuries-long battle of wits fought between an authoritarian state trying to build a leak-proof administrative machine and candidates who would stop at absolutely nothing to break it. We are not just talking about hiding a small paper note in a sleeve or whispering to the person sitting next to you. We are talking about custom-tailored silk shirts inscribed with tens of thousands of microscopic Confucian characters, hollowed-out inkstones filled with smuggled cheat sheets, elaborate networks of paid proxy test-takers who specialized in identity theft, and secret signaling codes embedded directly into essay phrasing to bribe blind graders. The real story of the imperial exams isn't just about the brilliance of ancient scholars or the moral decay of individual cheaters. It is about what happens when an entire civilization concentrates all social mobility, wealth, political power, and family survival into a single high-stakes standardized test. To understand why candidates went to such extreme lengths, we have to look at the sheer weight of what was at stake. Imagine a society where there are virtually no alternative ladders to upper-class success. There is no private corporate sector, no venture capital, no independent legal profession, and no corporate ladder to climb. If you were born a commoner in dynastic China, your options were strictly limited. You could farm the land, work as a manual artisan, or engage in commerce, which was often viewed with social disdain by the ruling elite. The imperial exam was the single, solitary golden ticket. Passing the highest level of the exam didn't just get you a job, it instantly transformed your social class. It granted you official title, tax exemptions, legal immunity from corporal punishment, and administrative power that could enrich your family for generations. To visualize this, imagine a high-stakes lottery where the entry ticket costs 20 or 30 years of agonizing, full-time preparation, consuming your family's entire life savings. If you win, you are handed the keys to social nobility. If you lose, you are left as a middle-aged scholar with no practical trade skills, facing financial ruin and social irrelevance. When the prize is absolute power and the cost of failure is total obscurity, the pressure on candidates becomes almost unimaginable. A vast majority of candidates would fail over and over again, spending their entire youth and middle age in continuous preparation. Under these conditions, cheating was not seen by many candidates as a reckless gamble. It was viewed as a rational, high-yield investment. If a family's collective future depended on one son passing the test, pooling resources to purchase an elaborate cheat sheet or bribe an official wasn't viewed merely as corruption. It was treated as a vital family survival strategy. When we examine how cheating actually functioned, historical documents and analytical perspectives reveal that it was far more than an isolated act of individual dishonesty. Scholars who analyze the economic structures of dynastic China argue that cheating operated as an organized, highly profitable underground market. At the center of this shadow market were the material tools of deception. Because candidates were subjected to physical searches at the gates, smugglers had to innovate. One of the most famous artifacts surviving from the Tang Dynasty is a cheat shirt made of fine silk. On this single garment, an anonymous artisan painstakingly wrote tens of thousands of microscopic characters using specialized ink and fine hairbrushes. The text contained entire classical commentaries, condensed into script so tiny that it required a magnifying lens to read. The garment was designed to be worn underneath heavy outer robes, completely invisible to standard visual inspection. Others utilized specialized stationery items, hollowed-out candle wax filled with rolled-up paper slips, inkstones with double bottoms, woven basket patterns that hid characters within their weave, brush handles unscrewed to reveal rolled scrolls, and shoes with hollowed heels were all regularly confiscated by exam officials. However, material smuggling was only the entry level of this hidden system. As physical searches grew more intrusive, the shadow market evolved into human proxy services. Wealthy families would hire highly educated, impoverished scholars known as proxy test takers to take the exam in place of their sons. These proxies were masters of forging identity documents and impersonating candidates, entering the exam compounds under assumed names. Even more sophisticated was the systemic corruption inside the examination administration itself. A prominent theory among institutional historians suggests that the exam system created an inescapable dilemma for government officials. Examiners were paid modest state salaries, yet they held the power to grant immense wealth to candidates. This structural imbalance created a massive incentive for bribery. To bypass official detection, candidates and corrupt graders developed intricate code languages. A candidate would be given a specific, obscure phrase to insert into a precise line of their essay. For example, a subtle reference to a specific weather pattern or an unusual poetic metaphor. When these examiners read the essay and spotted the phrase, they would mark the paper for passing grades, regardless of its actual intellectual merit. This dynamic triggered a continuous, centuries-long arms race between state anti-cheating technology and candidate innovation across successive dynasties. Historically speaking, during the Tang Dynasty, the exam system was relatively young and informal. Recommendations and social connections still played a major role, and cheating, while present, was less systematically targeted by state technology. By the Song Dynasty, recognizing that favoritism and cheating were undermining the legitimacy of the state, imperial administrators instituted sweeping structural reforms. They introduced the concept of blind grading, where the candidate's name and background details were folded and sealed with paper strips before the grader ever saw the paper. When candidates countered this by developing secret handwriting codes or distinctive brushwork with their examiners, the Song government escalated further. They created an entire department of administrative clerks, whose sole job was to recopy every single examination paper by hand in standardized red ink before it reached the graders. This process meant that examiners never saw the original candidate's handwriting or original paper, rendering handwriting signals completely useless. As the dynasties progressed into the Ming and Qing eras, the physical architecture of the exam itself was redesigned to resemble a high-security compound. Examinations were held in massive complexes containing thousands of tiny, isolated brick cells. Candidates were locked inside these cramped cubicles for days at a time, equipped with only basic provisions, an inkstone, paper, and a candle. They ate, slept, and wrote within this tiny space under constant surveillance from guard towers. Before entering the compound, candidates were subjected to rigorous body searches. Imperial guards inspected their clothing, unraveled their hair, and inspected their food, even slicing open steamed buns and poking through bean paste to check for hidden paper slips. Yet, as physical security tightened, the methods of evasion simply shifted to higher levels of sophistication. If you couldn't smuggle paper past the guard tower, you bribed the clerks who recopied the essays in red ink to subtly fix your mistakes or insert the secret code phrases during the copying process. The arms race never truly ended. It simply moved deeper into the administrative bureaucracy. The real-world impact of this hyper-competitive, cheat-plagued system on society was profound and multifaceted. For the vast majority of ordinary scholars who lacked the wealth to bribe officials or purchase microscopic silk robes, the system created immense psychological and financial strain. Generations of young men spent their productive years memorizing archaic texts, isolated from practical economic life. Families frequently went bankrupt paying for tutors, books, and travel expenses to examination centers, pinning all their financial hopes on a candidate who faced overwhelming odds of failure. Systemically, the prevalence of cheating and the extreme hyper-focus on passing the exam diverted intellectual talent away from practical fields. Rather than applying their intellect to engineering, medicine, agriculture, or economic policy, many of the brightest minds of the empire spent decades perfecting the art of rote memorization or devising clever ways to outsmart exam guards. When corrupt candidates successfully bought or cheated their way into office, the administrative efficiency of the state naturally suffered. Officials who secured their posts through bribery often viewed their appointments not as a public duty, but as an investment that needed to be recouped through local extortion and corrupt practices once in power. However, to view the imperial examination system strictly as a story of rampant corruption and failure would be a major oversimplification. It is essential to look at the counter perspective. When evaluated against the global context of its time, many historians and political scientists argue that the imperial examination system was a remarkably advanced and successful institution. While European kingdoms were still relying almost entirely on hereditary feudalism, selling military commissions, and distributing administrative power based on royal lineage, dynastic China was operating a centralized, standardized, and theoretically meritocratic civil service system. Despite its flaws, documented historical records show that across various dynasties, a significant portion of successful candidates came from families with no prior background in civil service. The system successfully integrated regional elites into a unified national culture and maintained a surprisingly stable administrative apparatus over centuries. Furthermore, the very anti-cheating mechanisms developed during these dynasties, such as anonymous grading, standardized testing environments, and double-blind evaluation, laid the foundational concepts for modern standardized testing systems used around the world. Today, the system was not failing because it was inherently poorly designed. Rather, it was struggling precisely because it was so powerful and effective that passing it was worth any price. When we look back at the history of the imperial exams, we see a striking mirror of modern societal struggles. Today, as we navigate the rise of AI writing tools, high-stakes standardized admissions tests, and hyper-competitive job markets, we find ourselves facing the exact same fundamental question that troubled ancient administrators. When an examination system becomes the sole gateway to social and economic survival, is cheating simply a failure of individual morality, or is it an inevitable design flaw of the bottleneck itself? What do you think? Leave your thoughts in the comments below.